Welcome to the Are We Idiots Show, where we question the status quo on society's important issues while mixing in plenty of laughs along the way. Now here are your hosts, Mark Weaver and Rich Kroll.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Are We Idiots Show. We are your hosts, as always, Richard Kroll via Skype and Mark Weaver in studio. Richie, how are you, buddy?
Marcus, I'm good. Thanks for asking. We had a little glimpse of what spring is supposed to look like today after having temperatures in the 30s for a week, even a little bit of snow flurry. I'm hoping we're getting closer to nice weather.
Of course, to our listeners in the Southern Hemisphere, of course, they're going into winter, but Rich is compartmentalizing us again in Pennsylvania. But most of our listeners are in Pennsylvania. I'll give you that, Richie.
Yeah, I don't think we have a lot of people south of the equator, but my apologies to them.
So we always start, Richie, with a tip of the day, and I know you have a plethora of wisdom to lend out to our listeners. So what is it today?
Today is, with coronavirus lockdown, there's been a run on a lot of consumer items in supermarkets and pharmacies. People all the time are complaining about no toilet paper or no fresh chicken in the supermarkets. But one thing we all need a lot of, besides hand sanitizer,
toilet paper.
Well, you just got to pick the spots when they stock the store. But you can't reproduce toilet paper. That's where I'm going with this quote, right? If I had a way to reproduce toilet paper using corn husks or papyrus, I would publicize that tip of the day. But I don't. So one of the things that are a premium to acquire are hand sanitizer wipes.
Yes.
Right. Sanitary wipes. And I know we've run out multiple times and you can't get them. It's like a tough item to find. So all you have to do, you keep the container you get them in, right? They kind of twist around and you pull them out of the top in little, 6-inch increments. Well,
right.
All you have to do is mix together 2 cups of warm water, 1 tablespoon of liquid soap, and 1 cup of rubbing alcohol. It should be at least 70% rubbing alcohol. 90% is better. Place paper towels, just regular, Scott paper towels, back in the container. Pour the liquid over the paper towels. And now you have instant sanitary wipes, cost effective and plentiful.
Now, I have one question. Aren't the paper towels bigger than the container? How's that work? Help me.
If you have your traditional 12-inch, yes, but they come in 6-inch perforated options as well, or then just cut them yourself into.
Yeah.
Okay.
And by the way, don't flush the sanitary wipes down the toilet, because I think it was Philadelphia and a lot of major cities were having all kinds of plumbing problems because people were flushing the sanitary wipes, which you should not do because you clog the sewers. So
that is true.
A little addendum to your tip of the day. Thank you for that, Richie. And before we get into the show, I want to make sure we thank our patrons: Mark Zlotnikoff, Eric Weaver, George Muldoon, Mike Smalls, Chris Barbie, Scott Carney, Alvaro Puga, Larry Helms, and Richie. I understand that we have a new patron this week, and I'll throw it over to you to announce that.
We absolutely do. Good friend of mine going back 30 years, Dr. Dave Nadler, N as in Nancy Nadler, probably the best chiropractor in the region. I was one of his first patients when he was at chiropractic school going to get his degree. He only hurt me 1 or 2 times. No, he's actually the best. He services celebrities. He's done local sports teams like the Philadelphia Wings, the Philadelphia Soul, the Philadelphia Spirit, or the soccer team. And obviously sports teams and celebrities don't go to somebody that's a quack. He has cured me, literally cured me of a chronic neck ailment. And my wife goes to him now to get a neck ailment treated. He's just a great guy and a great doctor.
Was he able to help your mental condition at all? Not so much.
No, that's a tough one to crack.
Well, thank you, Doctor. We appreciate your patronage, and welcome to the Are We Idiots support organization. And by the way, if anyone else wants to join all those folks we mentioned, platinum sponsorship, only $15 a month, gold sponsorship, $10 a month, silver sponsorship, $8 a month, and bronze, $5 a month. And heck, if you're a platinum or gold, we'll even send you an Are We Idiots coffee mug too. So
how about that? How about that?
What a deal. All right, Richie, on the show today, I have some Idiots of the Week to nominate for you. And then the majority of the show will be talking around fake news, COVID-19 edition.
Wow.
For our longtime listeners, you know that we did a show on fake news probably a year and a half ago. I don't know the exact episode. I'll put that in the show notes. But if you remember, Richie, we on that show we kind of narrowed down the process of which you determine fake news and vet fake news. And I'm summarizing a little bit, but essentially you have to look at the motivations. A lot of it could be financial motivations, political motivations, power motivations, and we detailed that. So I encourage listeners to go back and listen to that fake news show. But we're going to specifically focus around, since COVID-19 has been part of our lives for, I guess, better part of 2 months now, and there's been a lot of information shared.
A lot.
Around all the news media, and we're going to talk that through in a number of different, I guess, columns of information. So it sounds good, doesn't it, Richie?
It does. And let me also add that we're not here to just throw certain opinions under the bus and tell people they're stupid. I've heard both sides, from the far left and the far right, ranging from this is a complete hoax and a big conspiracy to I will not leave my house unless I have a hermetically sealed hazmat suit on. And I've read all the science on both sides pretty deeply. So our opinions and our facts are pretty well vetted. Not everyone's going to agree, but I think we have some good info today.
Yeah, and as we said on that original fake news show, the reality is that because there is so much uncertainty about our current situation, that actually breeds more theories and speculation. Because we talked about it on that. I'm harking back. We talked about it on that fake news show. We exemplified the tobacco industry and I think the food industry now, where if they can create enough confusion, that actually helps perpetuate their business. So we'll get into that as we go along. All right, Richie, I have one nominee that's very quick and the other one a little bit more lengthy, but I think you'll like both of them. They're both COVID-19 related. I wanted to stay with the theme of the show.
For Idiots of the Week.
Correct. These Idiots of the Week. Nominee number one, a Kazakhstan woman. This might be our first nominee from Kazakhstan, by the way. Fell more than 110 feet to her death last weekend after posing for a cliffside photo to celebrate the end of the area's coronavirus lockdown.
Oh, the end happened already, did it?
Alicia Sustapina, 31, was out hiking with a friend in Antalya, Turkey, following weeks of shelter-in-place ordered by the city. She climbed over a safety fence. Never
they're not there for a reason.
Never a good start. In the park, and posed for an image on the edge of a cliff in front of its scenic waterfalls. before slipping on some grass and plummeting 120 feet to her death.
Oh, boy.
Alicia was a smart and cheerful person. She set goals and made them happy, quoted one grieving relative to the Daily Mail. I guess I would add extreme risk taker to her bio as well. So, Richie, nominee number one, poor unfortunate soul that didn't seem to want to yield to the safety fence. And I saw the actual picture of this. I mean, she was literally on the lip of the Grand Canyon when she was posing.
So obviously we feel bad for her friends and family, but this is hashtag SMH, as in shaking my head.
Right.
What? First of all, how is coronavirus over? It's going to be part of our, lives for the rest of our lives. To go over a safety fence, and I'm sure there was a warning sign like, warning, take this under your own discretion.
Right.
And it just proves that the whole world isn't out to seclude us from doing things, right? I mean, most of the warning things and fences are for good reason, because there's something hazardous behind them, or some not necessarily a mysterious government entity like Area 51. So I don't know why people kill themselves over
pictures.
Stuff like this.
It's social media pictures, the pressure of millennials and I guess Gen Zs now to get a great picture on social media. I mean, that's the motivator. I mean, how many people have we had idiots that have either been hurt or killed trying to take a picture with a bear, or hanging out a window in a car, or hanging out of a train?
She did get a great picture. I'll give her that.
Yeah, they actually got the picture before she slipped. So, all right, that's nominee number one. Richie, I think this might be the winner, nominee number two, but here we go. A woman who was visiting a client for an in-home nail appointment during lockdown in South Carolina was attacked and killed by an alligator the other day. Cynthia Covert, 58, drowned Friday after an alligator repeatedly pulled her into a pond on Kiowa Island, which is kind of a fancy place.
I've been there for a golf outing a long time ago.
Her death has been ruled an accident. Barbara Howe said Covert came to her home to do her nails with a glass of wine and was, quote, acting strange. She probably looped up a little bit, according to the narrative report. Although Governor Henry McMaster lifted a mandatory stay-at-home order on May 4th, South Carolina beauty salons were still closed. Covert saw the alligator when she was doing Howe's nails on the porch, and when she finished, she left the porch to take pictures. Howe said she screamed to Covert that the alligator had previously grabbed a deer from that same spot, and Covert replied, "I don't look like a deer," and tried to touch the alligator. The alligator grabbed Covert by the leg and started to pull her into the water. Howe's husband, William, told police he heard the yelling and went to assist, and with a neighbor threw a rope to Covert, and she grabbed it while standing waist deep in the water and said, quote, "I guess I won't do this again," in a very calm voice, before the alligator started to roll and Covert lost her grip on the rope, and the alligator took her underwater as she released the rope, which is kind of a traumatic scene that I just described. Basically, 10 or 15 minutes later, Covert's body surfaced. So, she didn't make it, and she went with a wine glass in her hand to pet the alligator because she didn't feel like she looked like a deer. She didn't feel like she was at all a threat.
Oh boy!
So, idiot number two, Richie. What do you have to say about these nominees?
Well, this is hashtag SMH squared, because if you think about it, and the person getting their nails done said, she was acting strange. It sounds like she was high or on some type of drug, right? Because it's just not normal behavior. Nobody in their right mind has any inkling to pet an alligator or a crocodile or a prehistoric animal with razor sharp teeth.
That all they've done to survive is eat.
Well, and there's so many aspects. Yeah, there's so many aspects to this that For instance, why are you going to somebody's house to do their nails when you're not supposed to? Why? And then here's the weird part. This is like maybe a scene from the Twilight Zone. She got pulled into the lake by an alligator, and then she's standing there in waist deep water, not really doing much other than saying, "I'm not going to do this again, am I?" It's almost like an eerie, like ghost-like story about somebody possessed. So
I agree with you. She must have been high on drugs or something. I mean, who would be that calm if the alligator just drug you into the water and they're throwing your rope and she's like, "Well, I guess I won't do this again." I mean, I'd probably be screaming in my lungs out trying to get out of the water, wouldn't you?
And there's not a single story about alligators being friendly. I mean, there's plenty of stories where, people have tamed tigers and lions and bears. There's not one story about taming an alligator who, like you said, for 2 million years, their only instinct is to eat meat. So she wins. But I feel bad again for people that kill themselves over stupid behavior.
Although wasn't there a cartoon when we were young, Wally Gator? He was pretty nice. I liked him. He was a good.
Wally was very nice indeed.
All right, Richie. So that poor woman, I guess her heirs will get the $1 from you. It's your week to send it.
It's my week.
All right, folks. So now we're going to talk about the fake news around COVID-19, and we're going to try to keep it fairly specific, but there's so much. I mean, obviously, unless you've been under a rock, the news has been dominated for 2 months now on COVID-19. It's touched every aspect of our lives. It's something that none of us have ever lived through, and there's so many different facets of this and angles that we could touch on, but we've kind of narrowed it down to 4 or 5 different categories of what we're going to talk about, and I'll just go through them. And Rich, I know Rich feels strongly about a lot of this stuff, so we'll certainly have plenty to talk about over the remainder of the show. The one caveat that I'll say, and I've already introduced it, our fake news show that we talked about, and the kind of the similarities between that and this show. But the one caveat I will say is that some of this data around COVID that we'll talk about is preliminary, admittedly preliminary. I mean, there's the data around the world is, because it's a novel coronavirus, it is still weak data. And some of it, of course, a lot of it is still unknown. So it's with that caveat that we are, I think both Rich and I are pretty well informed on this, like Rich said earlier. But of course, more data will be known because this is so novel, and I'm sure a year from now will be even more accurate. I think that's
hence the name novel coronavirus.
Exactly. All right, Richie. So the first thing we're gonna try to do it in somewhat chronological order, but not exactly. So the first thing I want to talk about, where there's been a lot of disputes and polarization, is the origin of the pandemic, and I must give you credit here because I was kind of on the side of originally saying, well, this could have really happened anywhere, and I guess technically it could have happened anywhere, but we shouldn't call it the Wuhan virus or the China virus or whatever, because that could be offensive to folks. But I think Bill Maher, I'll give credit to Bill Maher because he did a real good segment on the history of how these things have been named, these pandemics or flus or whatever have been named. And the reality is that the Chinese Communist Party, not Chinese people in general, but the Chinese Communist Party is really culpable in the extent of the spread of this. I think that's indisputable now. But there's still a lot of conspiracy theories out there about the origin of this, whether it came from the wet market in Wuhan or it came from this Wuhan Institute of Virology, and whether it was a weapons program that was done intentionally or by escape by accident. So around this whole realm, Richie, what are your thoughts, and what do our listeners need to know?
Well, there's a lot of proof that many of the new viruses from the last 20 years have come out of China. And, some have come out of Western Africa and other places around the globe where civilization is not as advanced or people don't practice modern hygiene.
Right.
Or where fecal matter gets into the ecosystem, or
where animals are in close contact with humans, where it jumps.
Right. And it could be, mosquitoes transferring from animals to humans, and there's just no insect control or animal control, or just lack of human hygiene. Right. In this case, all fingers point to Wuhan. I don't think people are concerned anymore about exactly where it came from, unless it was some special virus being worked on in a lab, ultimately, as a chemical weapon. That would be extremely disturbing. I don't think, from everything I've read, that it's that.
I don't think so either, by the way. Because,
especially since so many people have been impacted in China with infections and deaths.
Right.
You normally don't take down millions of your own people if you're trying to ultimately get an attack another country. But I've looked at both sides, and then the biggest conspiracy was that the lab in Wuhan, in conjunction with U.S. military, was messing around.
Right.
There were, I think it's ridiculous, but there were a few Chinese scientists caught as early as 2018 at airport checkpoints trying to bring strange vials in a carry-on onto airplanes, and then when they detained them and found out it was actually a strain of coronavirus, that's where some of these conspiracies take off. Like, what were they doing coming into the U.S.? Why were they who were they going to talk to? Who were they going to work with? But it either came from a lab or the wet market. Although a lot of the original cases that were traced there was no interaction at the wet market. And for people that aren't really familiar with wet markets, it's
brutal, by the way. Don't watch it online. The videos, you don't want to see it. You'll be disgusted.
It's bizarre, right? And it's very exotic, weird animals kept in horrid conditions to ultimately be sold and eaten.
Right.
Whether it's snakes or squirrels or rats or bats. They thought this coronavirus came from an infected bat, but they layer these animals on top of each other in cages.
And they slaughter them right there, usually.
They slaughter them right there. The blood goes down to other animals. They pee and crap on animals below them.
Right.
They get sprayed with stuff. And the government has kept these things open in the past, traditionally to appease wealthy Chinese folks that like to be very exotic and eat exotic stuff. So I blame the Chinese government for the wet markets and not monitoring them for proper health conditions, and also eating things that I would think most people would find disgusting. But the main thing, Mark, can I call you Mark?
You can.
Is the proof now that the Chinese government knew about coronavirus as early as October.
Right.
And did everything in their power to conceal the information, suppress the information, cover it up, to try to protect themselves, maybe even to allow millions of travelers to come in and out of China, figuring, for whatever reason, we'll let the world get it. Maybe they thought it was leveling the playing field in financial markets with some of the Trump-imposed tariffs and other financial sanctions against China. But the Chinese government seems to make this worse and worse.
Yeah, and I'm not convinced that they purposely let it go. I think they purposely tried to cover up the severity of it because they thought they would keep it under wraps and they wouldn't, the government wouldn't look bad for its ineptness. And that went to a far extremes. Everyone's familiar with the doctor that tried to call attention to it, and he was ostracized and arrested by the police in Wuhan and told to apologize for creating a riot. And he later died. He was only a 34-year-old doctor. He later died of coronavirus. He was trying to alert the world of how dangerous this was. So, yeah, and this is what happens when you don't have a free press and you have a totalitarian, authoritarian government, and you can't have free press. So, yeah, I think we agree on that. The last thing before we move on to a next category is, I will say I thought it was quite ironic that early on, if you go back to Trump, he was praising the Chinese in January about how well they're doing with this, and it wasn't going to be a problem here, and and now Trump is actually blaming the Chinese, maybe want to put tariffs on them, saying that they may have to repay the world for all the financial damage. So Trump has contributed a little fake news himself in this. All right, Richie. Now this might be the most topical thing we talk about, and I'll put it under
tropical or topical.
Topical. Topical in that potency. I'll put it under the category of potency. And, there's a lot still today, 2 months into this, a lot of people, if you're out online, you still say, it's the same as the flu, or it's not really that dangerous. It's all media hype. It's all government trying to control us. It only affects the old and sick people. So what are we all worried about? I know you have a lot to say on this, but here's what I'll say, and then you can talk ad nauseum. Here's my proof point to all this to say that it really is more dangerous and more contagious than the flu, and that whole argument is moot. If you're a government leader around the world, I mean, what do leaders of governments want more than anything else? They want to appear competent and successful. And the absolute last thing a person in power would do is close down their economy and cause mass sacrifice and mass chaos if they didn't think if the alternative was worse. So that, to me, at the end of the day, that's my proof point, because leaders around the world want to retain power. They want to look good. They want their citizens to thrive because that makes them look good and they can retain power. There's no way they would shut everything down around the world if this wasn't a serious problem, and it would have been worse if they didn't. So what do you say?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And, I've had multiple people ask me to try to translate or decipher information. I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but my dad was the head of biology at a university for 35 years. So like it or not, I was fed a long lineage of information about biology, immunology, physiology, etc. So I have a pretty good feel to look at this stuff. And first of all, one of the big ones was, hey, what is all this commotion? It's no different than the flu. You realize 50,000 people a year die in the U.S. from the flu. The mortality rate's the same, 0.1%.
Trump was saying
this is way overblown. It's the same as what we already have. Okay, now here's what I'll say to those people. So I'll do it in a sports analogy. You have two Pro Bowl running backs. One averages 5 yards per carry. The second averages 5 yards per carry. Now, one team is a passing team, so they only hand it to the first running back 500 times, or say 100 times. The second team is a running team. They give it to that running back 200 times. Well, the second running back gets 2,000 yards for the season, and the first running back gets 1,000 yards for the season. They both average 5 yards per carry.
Well, your math is wrong, but it was 500 and 1,000 for 100, and if it was 5 yards a carry, 100. But I get your point. It's double the total yards, right?
Yeah, I guess I just squashed my own credibility with that math. But the point is, the second running back got twice as many carries.
Right.
This disease is spreading faster and more vehemently than the flu. Now, granted, we all have herd immunity from dealing with the flu for 100 years, and there's a vaccine. I get that. But this virus is a much smaller particle. It's stickier. It's more voracious in its ability to mutate cells once you get it. It's more infectious.
Right.
I
have one little like scientific, and I'm not good on this stuff, but I did look this up, Richie, for the show. It's R naught is the scientific term, and it's so basically it's the contagiousness, the R naught factor, and for the flu it's 1.2 to 1.6, and so far, and again this data is raw, but so far this coronavirus is 2 to 2.5. So basically what that means is in the flu, each one person that gets it will give it to 1.2 to 1.6 people. With coronavirus, the R factor is 2 to 2.5. So it's almost twice as contagious so far from the data they've seen.
Well, that's my point. So 4 months into the year, if 3 to 5 times the amount of people got coronavirus than the flu, even with the same 0.1 mortality rate, you're going to have 3 to 5x more infections and deaths.
And the exponential factor is staggering.
Correct. And that's starting to happen, by the way, around the world. So stop looking at the average yards per carry. Look at how many carries are actually taking place.
Right.
The other thing I'll say is one of the conspiracy theories is that many of the recent deaths are being attributed to coronavirus to help healthcare facilities and professionals get more funding from the CARES Act or whatever. And that if someone dies of a heart attack, they're saying it was coronavirus. If somebody is death by suicide, they're labeling it as coronavirus. So, okay, I will admit, if there are health officials falsifying records to gain more funding, that's an egregious criminal act.
And I wouldn't put it past them either, actually.
Well, I'll say I'm sure some are doing it.
Right.
But I think on the whole, from everything I've seen, most of the healthcare workers are moral, ethical people just trying to help.
Right.
And I can tell you how one of the statistics is being skewed, and I wouldn't disagree with it, right? So let's say somebody has an underlying heart condition, lung condition, they're obese, they have diabetes, whatever. But they're living, and they're probably going to live for another 5, 10, 15, 20 years with those conditions. If I add coronavirus to it and then makes them die within a month,
right?
Why can't I attribute that to coronavirus? Well, because there's all these other things that, well, yeah, but they were living with those conditions. Coronavirus was the catalyst that actually killed them. So if you want to label that a coronavirus death, I don't see why people would have a problem with that. So there's a couple things I would say how we've gotten it wrong, or some conspiracy theories are manipulating percentages and what's being reported.
And just on this particular subject, is it? What do you think the motivation is? Because not all people that are saying this are motivated by money. I do think that some of it is just ignorance in that it's an unseen threat. I think there's some people who just literally either have never even taken a biology class or haven't read about pandemics and viral spread. I think there's some aspect of it, and we've joked on text strings how people are just stupid. There's a lot of stupid people. I think because it's invisible, they just think it's not dangerous. Do you think there's something to that?
Well, I also think people tend to cling to anything that aligns with their life, right? So if you lost your job and you're PO'd that you lost your job because of the government lockdown, and maybe you rightfully should be able to work. So you're going to cling to any theory or information that helps your cause. A lot of people are inconvenienced, right? And they're getting itchy and they're getting annoyed. So they're looking for any information to support their cause. And why? Of course, they're going to go after this is no big deal. It's no different than the flu. It's corrupt doctors. It's corrupt pharma.
It builds their case, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and hey, do I think pharma is corrupt in a lot of ways? Absolutely. Are there corrupt healthcare people? Absolutely. But I'm finding people have so much time on their hands. They usually go the path that aligns with their belief system or what they hope to accomplish.
So what do you think, before we leave this, what do you think is the best source for information for people on the scientific part of this and its potency, is the way I've termed it? But is there a place you can guide people that's credible?
It's too long to list here, but here's how I'm looking at it. And here's a trend I'm starting to see. If I read an article from two doctors, one immunologist, one source, and it's all negative, it's all conspiracy related, this is garbage, I tend to think anything 100% one-sided is misguided or there's an existing agenda. If you read something that kind of acknowledges, okay, here's where some of the conspiracy theories or numbers or might be a problem, but here's what we've seen. I look for collaboration, multiple sources. Go look up the people's names. Like I think in one of your next categories, all of a sudden, if it's only two people saying something, or you find out they're financially in trouble, or you find out they've been discredited in the past, or they're former doctors, or they have some underlying financial agenda, personal agenda, then you kind of can know that it's BS.
Yep. Yeah, and we talked about that on the fake news show. You really have to ask the second and third level questions, and it's a burden because we have so much information at our fingertips now. It's an additional burden we have. So, all right, Richie. So this third category, maybe you don't feel as strongly about it as me, but maybe we can get through it pretty quickly. I'll term it who's responsible or in charge to deal with this. And as our listeners know, I'm a individual liberty person and libertarian. I advocate for small government, for small federal government especially. And of course, there's a lot of people out there in social media and regular media now saying, "Well, these libertarians now, this is what they want. They don't want a strong government, and this is when we really need a federal government." And in my mind, I'll term it the upside down pyramid of responsibility. And a lot of people think that it's the federal government really needs to guide us, and they need to have a strong hand, and they need to tell us what to do and give guidance for everyone. And we have a federalism system of states' rights. And in my mind, the pyramid of responsibility, or the upside down pyramid of responsibility, starts with the individual. Like I locked my family down and adhered to the social stay-at-home orders to not overwhelm the healthcare system. But I did that because of personal reasons and pro-life reasons, not necessarily because the government told me to do it. So in my mind, and again, good people can disagree, the individual has the most responsibility to protect themselves. The local government is second. The state government is third. And the federal government is kind of the last tier of responsibility here. Yes, they need to provide some guidance, and Dr. Fauci and the CDC provide overall information. But really, I look at them as providing information and maybe help coordinate the states so that individuals can make individual risk assessments. What's your thought?
Well, this one's out of my pay range because, first of all, we have a president that's supposed to oversee the good of the whole country. But then in a case like this, we have the individual governors that are supposed to monitor and make up the rules for each state. But as this continues to drag on, different states are going to react differently depending on if you're a liberal or conservative, or your state's getting crushed financially, or you think somebody else is stupid.
Or you have high density of people, like New York City versus Wyoming.
Good point. So I don't know how the heck, because if you get your arms around this, because, some countries have the population of New York, and they're small, right? But we have such a big country with different government branches. Who's to say who's right and how you govern down to the individual? And this goes to I'll call it the Sweden versus the rest of the world approach. So Sweden is taking on a herd immunity approach, trusting their people to make the right decisions. And supposedly Sweden has a different culture where they're more like a big family, and they're going to listen and behave properly, where with a drastic range of personalities in the U.S. from F you to yes sir, there's no way to police that. And
right.
I guess we'll get to herd immunity versus lockdown and flattening the curve, because I think there's pros and cons to both. Sweden today has a lot more deaths than their Nordic neighbors like Denmark and Finland, but supposedly they are going to get through this quicker. So more deaths up front versus more deaths back ended. And I can't say that one way or another is best. I can say that, if you're going to let more people die up front, you better have measures in place to protect the vulnerable, right? So you can't just let anyone get to be exposed to it. Anyone who's going to die is going to die. That doesn't make sense to me. Right. If nursing homes and the elderly are the number one by far group, then there should be measures in place to isolate those people, protect those people, versus just let them get it if they're meant to get it. Because again, my simplified premise is, if someone was going to live without coronavirus, why just let them get it and let them die? Easier said than done, but
right.
There's going to be a lot more information that comes out. If Sweden does not get a second wave, like a lot of countries are already starting to get a second wave, and the U.S. is one of the hardest hit, even though we have, quote, lockdown, although it's been very loose. I don't think a lot of people around the country are following it. The minute they let something open, like a beach in California, Texas, Florida, 5,000 people show up, no masks, sitting next to each other, hugging, drinking beers together. And then invariably there's a spike in that community. So, again, a lot of data still needs to be accumulated to figure out what the best approach is right now.
Okay, and we'll move on to the what to do now with the quote, how long do we need to be locked down? The last thing I'll say as we leave the who's in charge thing, I guess, and again, this is probably evident if you listen to the show. I just don't have a lot of faith in the competency of a big bureaucratic, huge federal government. We on a different text string that you're not on. A bunch of couples. One of the guys said, "I expect the government to have a competent, effective, and fast response time to a pandemic." I'm thinking, like, when does that ever happen, right? In history,
right?
When is government? So I'm very skeptical of the competency of government, especially a federal government, in the first place. So that's why I think individuals have to take the primary responsibility. But all right, so let's go to this, Richie. This is probably the most current part of it. Is how long and in what form do we kind of come out of this lockdown? And again, I said earlier on, I was totally on board early on about not overwhelming the healthcare system, flattening the curve. I think most people would agree we're largely past that. Hospitals, even the temporary hospitals and treatment centers have been taken down now because we're not going to have that overwhelming the healthcare system. So we're past that. We have an unsustainable model of writing checks to infinity to try to, pay people that haven't been able to work. That's not sustainable. So we have to find some middle ground of being safe or safer, maybe not totally safe, and finding a way to start working again. But there is so much disagreement about this, and if you even mention that you're for this, the inference is you're ready to kill grandma. So where do you come down on all this, Richie?
I think social distancing and just best practices, even if inconvenient, are smart, right? I can't stay in my house every day. I do think getting out, I mean, we talked about this in previous episodes. Yeah, getting outside is absolutely helpful. My sister knows a lot about nature and, being exposed to the sun and the trees and the plants being helpful. And I 100% agree, right? Exposure to sunlight, getting the phytoncides we covered in another episode from plants and trees that naturally boost your immune system. You got to do it. You got to get out there and walk around. Now, do I want to walk around on a boardwalk at the ocean with 45,000 people, sharing pizza and water ice and sneezing on each other? Heck no. Right. Do I want to walk down a boardwalk with a mask on? I can't breathe that. No. But I'm going to avoid that situation. Right. So, but we've been doing curbside pickup, from restaurants. We've had plenty of deliveries to the house, so we don't have to go into a store. We really only go into a supermarket. My wife does it, Jill, with a mask, and in a pharmacy. Other than that, everything's curbside or delivery. Now,
but that doesn't work for everyone. There's barbers and nail salons and house cleaners. I mean, there's thousands of other services related that currently are not permitted to work. And how do we get them engaged? We can't just keep writing them checks.
Well, they're going to have to wear masks. And I think the best way to approach this is agree with or debunk a couple of the most common themes or conspiracies or best practices, right? Let's start with the mask. So, a lot of people are doing homemade masks made out of underwear or, workout pants or whatever. And the science will tell you that's stupid. From some science, because the particles are so small, they'll go right through your mask and you're going to get it anyway. But there's a ton of proof that wearing a mask is not about preventing you from getting sick. It's about not giving it to somebody else. There's a great article that's just out right now from a biology professor out of Dartmouth that lists the virility of coronavirus, whether you're walking, sitting, breathing, running and breathing, you cough, you sneeze, and it details how much of the virus comes out of each of those actions, how far it goes. And a mask will prevent a lot of the distance and volume of the coronavirus. So wearing a mask is more to prevent others from getting it. It won't necessarily protect you. So I think it's a good idea to wear a mask in crowded areas. Now, unfortunately, there's some supposedly reputable people making opinions about this, and then it goes viral on social media. Right, the two doctors out of California, Dan Erickson and Arten Masahi, they were saying, don't worry about it at all. This is stupid. You don't need a mask. You don't need to wash your hands. You don't need to do anything because we actually need exposure to this to build herd immunity. And all of this is, a ridiculous hoax. We can go by all the patients we take care of. And they were very arrogant about it. I watched the video. They were very nonchalant and arrogant. Then I did some digging. And first of all, they're not even epidemiologists. They own urgent care centers in the Bakersfield, California area. Their information had no collaboration or peer-reviewed data. And apparently they were trying to advance their personal financial interests because they were being negatively impacted by coronavirus.
That would never happen.
Right? And then even health officials in their county said, we don't agree with any of their claims. And now both doctors are not returning calls to news media. So you got to be careful and just don't take a seemingly credible person with a title and what they say, look into it a little bit further. The other thing I'll say is, and this is a big one, all right, and hopefully I don't kill too much time with this one, but the 26-minute documentary Plandemic came out recently. And this was done by an independent filmmaker, Mickey Willis, interviewing former biochemist Judy Mikovits. My own family member sent this to me and said, see, this is a government conspiracy, blah, 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 blah. So I go, let me look into this, because maybe it is, and maybe this is the next big scandal that's proven. So I looked into it, and this Dr. Mikovits is kind of a discredited former biochemist. Bit of a little wacky. The filmmaker Mickey Willis announces to start the interview, one of the most accomplished scientists of her generation. And then when other scientists were interviewed, they never even heard of her. And she wrote a book, and she had some studies. The most famous one was 2009. She did a study that was related to vaccines and the effect of chronic fatigue syndrome. And when they went to replicate her study, nobody could replicate the findings or the results. And then when they dug deeper, they found out that her results were due to a lab contamination, right? So, and then, she was supposedly thrown in jail for stealing documents that she said she was set up by Dr. Fauci, and that Dr. Fauci is one of the masked demons of all this, that's financially motivated, being paid by pharmas, and he's been corrupt his whole life.
Don't forget Bill Gates. He wants the mark of the beast on everyone. We heard about that one today.
Yeah,
there's some crazy people.
Crazy. Then she has this claim that Italy was hit hardest because the coronavirus was part of the flu vaccine grown in dog cells. And first of all, coronavirus has nothing to do with the flu vaccine. If anyone understands the science of vaccines, there are chemicals added to actually kill the pathogen, so you can't get it, you can't get infected, but there's traces of DNA that enable your immune system to build up immunity against it, right? So a lot of her past studies and work, she's basically a discredited, disgruntled ex-scientist.
Right.
So, when I looked into then I looked into, okay, what's the deal with this filmmaker, Mickey Willis, former model, former wannabe actor, has done a couple documentaries. He's actually trying to make a name for himself. And one of his direct quotes were, yeah, we made the video to go viral. We knew the branding was conspiratorial and shocking, but you kind of have to do that to get people's attention.
Oh, boy.
He said some of her claims that he couldn't validate through third-party collaboration, other scientists, were still left in to start conversations that will hopefully actually get to the truth.
So, in other words, clickbait.
Yeah, so I'm looking at this going, okay, there's probably some partial truths in there about pharmaceutical corruption and big pharma trying to create billions of dollars, but none of it can be substantiated. Yet this went viral and 15 million people watched it, and now everyone's... So, Again, you got to be really careful in what you believe. And her, the average person has no idea about science and immunology and physiology, and they just, wow, looks credible. Folks, go look into these people's backgrounds. Just don't sit there because someone has a title and looks serious and looks real and believe it. And if you mix a little bit of the truth in with a lot of falsehoods, you're going to get away with it.
And so, just to summarize, as far as lockdown goes, you think it's best made by individual states and individual municipalities and individuals that run businesses, and that's my concern here, is because you and I are both fortunate, we're still getting paid, but there's a lot of people out there that are, I think I read the stat today, 40% of people with household incomes $40,000 or under, 40% of them lost a job in March. So, I mean, for those people, they're the ones that need to really assess all the risks here, health and economic. And, if you're some plutocrat or media member that is saying, well, we must eliminate all risk to coronavirus before anyone can go back to work, that's not a reasonable position, especially if you're collecting your old salary and you're working out of your house. So anyhow, I know we got to move on because we only have a couple minutes left, but that's a good topic. All right. So, and we can kind of not skip, but we can certainly go light on this last bullet point, Richie, because we already did the CARES Act scam episode a couple back, and that dealt a lot with the government assistance and the boondoggle that it's turning out to be. I think it's going to turn out to be even more of a boondoggle as we get more and more information out. Suffice it to say that they're already talking as we tape this. They already spent $3 trillion or $2.9 trillion. And now the Democrats are proposing an additional $3 trillion on top to help everyone under the sun, it seems like. And the particular emphasis now is the states. Now, so all the municipalities and the states, shockingly, when people aren't working, there's no tax revenue coming in. So now we got to bail out the states. And many of these states have huge pension requirements. New York, Illinois, California come to mind, where they've promised these huge pensions where people work for 30 years and they retire with, six-figure pensions and some even more than that. And they were in bad shape prior. Now they're going to use the COVID-19 as their lottery ticket to dig themselves out of a huge hole. So any thoughts around that before we have to close the show?
I'll tie in two thoughts with the previous number 4 and this number 5. Look, I think it comes down to the individual. Now, if you have strict laws where you're going to get arrested or, whatever, whether that's illegal or wrong or immoral or and hurting your life, be careful. You don't want to get arrested. But I do think it comes down to the individual. And I would just say that, if you're hurt financially, you got to figure out a way to get out of your house and go work. And I agree that should be your choice. I would just say everybody needs to be cognizant of not spreading this to vulnerable people.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm not going to go all of a sudden to a family party with 30 people in the same room and start hugging. Yeah. I'm not going to walk arrogantly through a supermarket without a mask or through somebody's house. I may not even walk into somebody's house.
I may not fly for a year.
I may not fly,
yeah.
But supposedly airplanes are clean. Use your best judgment. If you have to do something, go do it, but be thoughtful about other people because you don't know if you have it. Part of the problem is there'll be millions of people that have this, have no symptoms, don't even know they have it.
Right.
So think about if you had it, pretend if you had it, but you had to go out in public, what would you do to prevent somebody from getting it? Like we won't walk into somebody's house and touch all their doorknobs and the bathroom we'll try to avoid it. If we have to, we bring that homemade hand sanitizer and we wipe things down. Who knows if we have it? Right. So don't kill yourself financially, but then don't kill people that wouldn't have died if they didn't get it.
And as far as the government writing bailouts to infinity, I know you're a little more fiscally liberal than I am, but do you have any thoughts on the almost unlimited amount of money we're spending?
You and I are in mostly agreement with this. Let's call it 95%. I don't think universities that have billion-dollar endowments should get any money. I don't think greedy companies that aren't ready for a rainy day there's a lot of areas, corporations and people that should not be getting any money at all. Right? But for somebody that did everything right and did save for a rainy day and it's just if there's some money to keep them alive because our society would be better with certain businesses. I know you don't agree with that, but I agree with you 95%. Instead of having trillions of dollars towards this.
It's all borrowed, though. I guess. Because I actually agree with you in principle that as a society, if we had the money, that it's okay to take care of people in need, a certain percentage. The problem is we're borrowing it all. We don't have any money. I guess that's why where I really draw the line is it'd be great if we were flush. We're not.
Yeah, and that's an age-old dilemma. But I'd rather. I'm not saying the deficit's already bad enough. I'm not saying double it, but if it goes a little deeper and saves millions of people from going bankrupt and suicide and becoming alcoholics and depression, if we add a little bit to it, but millions of people benefited, that 5%, I'm okay with it. We're already screwed as it is with lifetime debt. So,
well, I could go on for hours about that, but we don't have time. So, Richie, good topic of discussion today. It's almost an hour coming up on this show, so we're obviously talking a lot, but good episode. Hopefully you listeners enjoyed it. And as we talked about on the last several episodes, we're going to continue doing takes around this crisis, and we have more episodes coming soon. As always, please remember, if what you see or hear sounds idiotic, then we're just the guys to help you sort it out. See y'all next episode.
Thank you for listening. Please download, subscribe, share, and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and also our website.